All right, I will call to order the meeting of the Policy Committee for tonight, March the 4th, 2020. For everybody that's been watching Education at Home, welcome back. And we'll get going rather quickly here. Dr. Yanni, any announcements or communications?
Last month, we looked at the medications policy, and when that went for approval, we contacted our attorney because it only focused on, I'm sorry, it was very restrictive in what it referred to as emergency medications. So we just used the phrase moving forward, emergency medication, so that it would encompass any type of emergency medication that kids would need. So it wouldn't just be an auto inhaler, it wouldn't just be an EpiPen, it would be any type of emergency medication. So that was updated. And speaking with Mr. Dazio, that was a non-substantive change. So I just wanted to make everyone aware that we just broadened that term as a catch-all.
Excellent, thank you. Moving on, we have minutes from our February 5th, 2020 policy meeting. If anyone has any questions or comments, otherwise we'll move them forward to the legislative agenda. And we'll hop right into our policy issues for this month. First, we have, for second reading, 7 policies that went through first reading last month. The first 5 of those, essentially, P303, 307, 311, 312, and 313, had some revisions to combine prior policies and to consolidate some prior policies. Dr. Yanni, has anything changed or anything you want to comment about those upon second reading?
No. When we talk about the suspension and furlough policy, which is 311, I just want to walk the board through what is going to be in the administrative regulation to comply with the applicable law. I don't have anything on 303. I'm not sure if anyone else did.
Anybody have anything on 303? Stan?
Just one typo there on under guidelines. There's says proper certification and certification a second time. So I think you should just strike out certification a second time.
Good catch. Anything else on 303? Okay, we'll move that forward. 307, student teachers. Any comments or questions? Hearing none, we'll move that forward.
I would like to update the board just on what will be in the administrative regulations. So for a student teacher to come to Upper Dublin, they have to, before we'll even consider them, they have to come from a program that is recognized by the Pennsylvania Department of Education. It doesn't mean that it has to be from a college or university in Pennsylvania. It just has to be recognized by the Department of Education. So they have to complete all of their coursework. They have to have a current health examination, and they have to have current clearances. The good news is you can't student teach. Your university won't even let you go out until you have those 3 things done. But the universities always supply us with that information. We had talked internally about the number of student teachers, sort of an upper limit of what we would not want to exceed. Some districts, we're in a really prime location because we're right off the turnpike. And so there are times that we get many, many, many more requests for student teachers than we can handle. So what we said was internally that in any elementary school, we would have no more than 5 student teachers per semester. At the middle school, we would not have more than 8, and at the high school, we would not have more than 10. We typically do not come close to those numbers, but we are starting to see a small uptick of kids going back into education, and so we anticipate over the next couple of years getting some more requests for student teachers.
That's in each elementary school?
In each elementary school, right. And as superintendent, and my designee would be Mr. Hoffman, we're very intentional about who we would pair a student teacher with in terms of a cooperating teacher in one of our buildings. We want cooperating teachers that are highly effective, that have a track record of success with kids. Because anytime you're putting someone in a position, to student teach, you're a rookie, you're a novice, and we want to make sure that we're supporting not only that student teacher, but we're also not putting kids in a situation where someone's trying to learn to teach and we don't have a very highly effective teacher coupled with that student teacher.
Excellent. Anything else on 307 or Dr. Yanni's comments before we move on? All right, we'll move that forward. 311, suspension and furloughs. Dr. Yanni, you said you had a comment there.
Sure. Just suspension and furlough, the Department of Education uses those terms interchangeably, so just so that everyone is aware. Now, there have been, for a long time, 3 reasons that you could furlough or suspend professional staff, and they were curtailment or elimination of programming, a decline in enrollment, or consolidation or reorganization of schools, opening or closing a school. Recently, in the last couple of years, the Department of Education has added a 4th reason, and that's furlough for economic reasons. Now, try to follow this, and if anyone can answer the questions at the end, there'll be a prize before you leave. If and when a district wants to furlough staff for economic reasons, you have to petition the Department of Education to do so, and you have to furlough the same percentage of administrative staff that you would do professional staff, okay? When you furlough for economic reasons, you have to furlough by buckets. So teachers are put into one of 4 buckets, and it has to do with their evaluations. So bucket 1 would be folks that have had 2 unsatisfactory evaluations. Theoretically, those folks no longer exist because 2 unsatisfactory evaluations and you're terminated. The second bucket is an unsatisfactory evaluation and a satisfactory evaluation. So those would be the next people furloughed. The third group of teachers that would be furloughed would be teachers that have 2 proficient evaluations, or a proficient and a distinguished evaluation. And then the last people to be furloughed would be folks that have had 2 consecutive distinguished evaluations. So if we would have to furlough for elimination of programming, decline in enrollment, or consolidation of schools, it's pure seniority. When you furlough for economic reasons, it is within these categories of evaluations. So typically, economic furloughs are typically not used unless a district is really cash strapped, because the way you have to furlough staff is pretty draconian. When you furlough for any of those other reasons, you can do something called checkerboarding. So a very real experience I had in another district, we closed a wood shop. That wood shop teacher had a French certificate, never used. That wood shop teacher became a had the ability to ask for realignment and become a French teacher. When you furlough for economic reasons, there are no options for realignment. So that will all be enumerated in the AR.
Any questions or comments from the committee or the board about 311? Okay, we'll move that forward. 312 is evaluation of superintendent. Dr. Yanni, anything to add on that one?
We added a definition of objective performance measures. Act 82 of 2012 refers to a superintendent's goals as objective performance measures, and they're the mutually agreed upon goals between the superintendent and the board of directors.
Questions or comments? Mark?
One minor comment, that definition is in the wrong place. It should be up above. It's in the middle of the guideline section. It should be up,
Yes.
above the guideline section.
Yep, it needs to be moved up. It needs to be moved up above guidelines.
And it's old language, but bullet 8 under the evaluation criteria says consideration of objective data regarding a variety of things. I'd like to strike, especially because we now have the word objective and objective performance measures, I'd like to strike the word objective from that, because I think some of these categories for consideration are not easily objective. They're inherently, some of them are more inherently subjective. I think the simplest solution is just strike the word objective there, consideration of data.
Agreed.
There's also, Brooke, just an extra "and" after the new comma in that bullet. That's all I've got on that one, thank you.
Anyone else on 312? Okay, with those,
And in my opinion, I don't think striking objective is a substantive change. I think we can move forward.
agreed.
Okay.
Okay, with those, with those comments, we will move 312 forward. 313, which is evaluation of district staff. Dr. Yanni, anything on that one?
Under authority, where it says the board directs the written evaluations of all employees be performed at least annually, I would like to add the phrase "in accordance with applicable law." One of the things we've talked about, there have been some employee groups in the district that have not been evaluated despite school code saying that they have to be evaluated. You know, for example, bus drivers and custodians historically have not had evaluations done. We have developed evaluation instruments for those folks now. And so I just want to be clear moving forward that every employee in the district gets evaluated.
Comments, questions? I think that makes sense. Again, a non-substantive change, so we can keep that on for second reading. We'll move 313 forward. We now have two second reading policies in the 700s. The first is 705, which is safety. Dr. Yanni, anything to add between first and second reading on that policy?
So much of what is stricken out in this policy has been moved to the administrative regulation. Working with Mr. Dazio, our solicitor, he felt that much of that language was more appropriate in the AR and not in the policy. This is a policy that I'm going to bring back on an annual basis because, as we have learned multiple times over the last couple of months, there are any number of updates to safety regulations that we have to stay on top of, specifically around security guards, security officers, and whatnot. So I have this flagged in my notes that we'll bring this back on an annual basis to look at, just to make, and there may be times where we don't have to do anything to the policy, but just to make sure that the policy is up to date.
Questions or comments from the board? Okay, we'll move that along. And the last one we have for second reading tonight is 707, which is community access to district facilities. Dr. Yanni, any comments on that policy?
Not on the policy. The administrative regulation, this is the policy and administrative regulation that caused quite a lot of discussion in the district several months ago, making sure, or we're making sure that the process for usage of space is equitable, and making sure that district groups have priority over non-district groups, and making sure that even though we say that, sometimes there are large facilities, i.e. the pool, that accommodate multiple groups at the same time. So we reviewed everything in the administrative regulation with Sue Lohofer, our facilities and community affairs manager, to make sure that how we are scheduling is what's reflected in writing.
Excellent. Any questions or comments from the board?
I have a few on this one.
Sure.
And because this was, you know, as Dr. Yanni said, because this one came up recently, I want to be careful to get it right. In the new first paragraph under guidelines, it says, and this is new language, district-sponsored activities and activities in which Upper Dublin students make up the majority of participants will be given priority when scheduling. So there used to be language that basically gave a, and some of it was in the AR, a sort of a ranking order of priorities. In this phrasing, these two groups have equal priority, and I don't know that they should. I would like to make it clear that district sponsors activities are the top priority. External activities in which Upper Dublin students make up the majority of participants would be a second priority, and I would even add that external activities in which Upper Dublin residents make up the majority of participants would be a third.
Okay, so what I'll do is I will say, that sentence that says, that starts with district-sponsored activities, how about if we say, priority shall be given in this order to, whatever, I'll pretty up that language. Say, district-sponsored activities for our students, district-sponsored activities where our students make up the majority, and then activities that are comprised of a majority of Upper Dublin residents. Is that, am I hearing you
Yeah,
correctly?
I think that the second and third are really the same thing. One is about where our students are the majority, and one is where other
the
residents who are not
okay.
our students may be the majority.
That makes sense, thank
yeah.
you.
Yep. Let's see, can I keep going, Jeff?
Yeah, I was just going to say that, I mean, I think that that is a non-substantive change for purposes of this policy, if everyone agrees, because we said it would be given priority, which means there would be a ranking within anyway, and we're just
Yeah.
creating a new subset. So I think this can move forward, assuming there are no other changes on second reading.
Okay. I have two more, so I lost my tab. So there's a new word, community, in bullet 10, prohibition of community political campaigning. I don't understand what that means.
I think the import of that word is this is a policy that's about community access to district facilities. And I think there is perhaps a misperception among some people about the breadth of number 10 and how it's used as a consideration. And so I think that the insertion of the word community is to say that within the limits of the First Amendment, the school district can't stop free expression within schools, subject to certain limits that the Supreme Court have set out, which we're going to talk about probably in a little bit. But for example, with students, they get free expression within a school unless or until it impedes the educational process or things like that. So that's the constitutional test, essentially. What we're really focused on here is political campaigning by outside groups or by people that would want to use or lease the district facilities. And I think the import of that word was to be clear that we're not in any way trying to infringe upon First Amendment rights of students or even teachers to the extent that they're in our buildings. Does that make sense? And maybe we can rephrase it to communicate that better.
Yeah, so I think I understand what you're trying to get at there. If I didn't understand it, my goal in the policy language is to make sure that later when we hold this policy up to something that's going on, that we understand what we mean. And
Completely agree.
And I'm not sure, is there some kind of political campaigning that's not community political campaigning would be a question that got asked, does this bullet apply to me because what I'm doing isn't community political campaigning, campaigning for state representative or whatever. It's it's something else. So I think I'm trying to think of other phrasing that may convey what you're trying to get at. It's political campaigning by someone other than district activity, something other than district activity. Is that what? So
Yeah, I think we're getting closer there.
Okay, let me go to my other question because I think maybe these two can be solved together.
Sure.
The heading for this bulleted list is consideration for usage and leasing, and I think what we're trying to say in I'm not sure that bullet 10 is a consideration more than it is an outright prohibition. It's not. I feel like it can be a separate paragraph and just say political campaigning. Political campaigning is prohibited, and then give the caveats that the three caveats that are listed underneath to soften that, as opposed to making it a bullet here and then then we don't need the word community. Because campaigning is really the issue. It's not who is doing it, it's what the activity is.
What if, to try to address both of your points, would it make sense to leave it as number 10, but to rephrase it to say, to echo what is above, and maybe this is only restating in a sense, prohibition of political campaigning by persons seeking to use or lease district facilities, but while permitting. Would that, let me ask first, would that help with the ambiguity in the word community being there?
Can you repeat that?
Sure. Prohibition of political campaigning by persons seeking to use or lease district facilities, but while permitting, and then to the exceptions. What do people think of that phraseology?
It seems like it just seems that we already have that wording. It just seems to be redundant. It's under considerations for usage and leasing, and then to put that back in number 10 just seems redundant to me.
Yeah, so maybe community is already implied because if you're a school activity, you're already not, well, you're not leasing, but you're still doing usage. So actually, that's never mind. Jeff, why don't you and I try to agree on something, and we'll bring it to the legislative meeting as hopefully a non-substantive change, so we don't have to try to do it here in the meeting.
I'm good with that, because I think that whether the word was left in, changed, or deleted, I don't think that creates a substantive change, because it's just really nuancing the words of the policy. Everybody on the board go with that? Jen?
I have a question now.
Sure.
What other things do we prohibit? Because it seems like there's probably other activities that we would prohibit, and why are we only mentioning campaigning?
My answer to that would be, I mean, it says considerations shall include, so there could be others, but I think my gut is telling me there have probably been requests in past history that would fall into this category, and therefore, historically, there's been a need to have that called out. It's not to say that this list of 10 is the be-all and end-all of the considerations that the district would use in deciding whether space should be used or leased. So there could be
that
other
wording in there, like that this is not a
Well,
comprehensive list?
I mean, to me, it's by saying shall include,
Okay.
it says that. But if you think you want more, we can talk about it.
I just imagine there's other, it's now sticking
Indeed.
out to me that this is strange, that this is the only thing we're prohibiting. I would think that
Yeah, that's what I was catching too, the thinking it belongs as a separate paragraph because it's not exactly a consideration. But, I mean, we're not going to consider it, it's prohibited. You're not,
Well, but there are exceptions, because you could
yeah.
consider it if it's for a bipartisan political forum, for example, under B. So, to me, it does become a consideration because there are exceptions, as opposed to just saying boilerplate.
So
it
I
doesn't.
agree with Jen's thing. I think that first thing should be shall include but are not limited to.
That's fine. But
I think if you and I can, outside the meeting, wrestle with the language and bring it on Monday or whenever the next legislative meeting is.
If I could just be kept in the loop on that, because I have some, I
Yes,
have
of course.
some strong thoughts. I think we're going down all this road of all this political stuff because we're trying to undo something that was done with a voter registration policy, and now I just feel like it's seeping its way into other policies, and I want to be very careful, because at the end of the day, what we want to make sure is that we don't have any partisan activity by adults on our school grounds.
Yeah,
Agreed.
I agree, and so that is exactly what I think this bullet 10 with 3 sub-bullets is trying to capture, and it's not exactly capturing it.
Any other questions or comments? Otherwise, I think Mark's suggestion is good, that he and I and Dr. Yanni can work on something and bring it to the board at the legislative meeting in order to just refine the language of the stated intent of this policy. Mike?
The item 10, is that something that fits better in the AR versus the policy?
No, I feel like this is policy.
You think?
Yeah,
policy
just
is
because
more-
it's such a tenuous nature, what I don't want anyone to assume is we put it in the AR so that it could be easily changed without
Got it,
a board
okay.
vote.
Got it, okay.
Okay. All good thoughts and comments. We will bring that back at the legislative meeting with a minor adjustment. Okay, that finishes our second readings. We'll move forward to second reading repeals. We have a series of policies there that are up for second reading repeal. 304, 504, 304-1, 305, 306, 411, 412, 512, 413, and 414 and 514.1. The vast majority, if not all of these, are being repealed because they've been either consolidated into other policies or have been otherwise addressed in other policies. Dr. Yanni, anything to add about those repeals?
No, just that the repeal of those policies have been conversations among superintendents across the county, as people are now starting to update their policy books and merge things so that there's a more succinct way to find the information that you need to find.
Any questions or comments about those for second reading repeal? All right, hearing none, we'll move that forward to the legislative meeting, and we'll move to our first readings for this month, of which we have 5 policies. We'll start with P105, which is curriculum development. We'll then also have 105.1 and 105.3, which are also related to curriculum through review and review process. Dr. Yanni, do you want to provide a little introduction for this?
Sure. So the curriculum development policy, policy 105, actually is talking about the actual written curriculum, and then also references the textbooks or instructional resources that we use to deliver the curriculum. Much of, well, everything that is, you see a red line there, those are things that we have moved to the administrative regulation to keep the policy succinct and clean. So if anybody has any questions about that information, I'm happy to answer any of those.
I do have one comment on this policy under delegation for, not exactly on what you were talking about just now, Dr.
Sure.
Yanni, but delegation responsibility, bullet B, there's a new language while on district property. And I'm curious why that's there. Employees in performance of their duties while on a field trip, not on district property, still should be covered, I think, by the regulations that had this.
I'm sorry, where are you? I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, under
I lost
delegation of responsibility,
Okay.
first set of bullets, bullet B. I'm in the wrong policy. Never mind. Sorry, I'll come back to that when we get there.
I was like, do I have the wrong copy?
I'm in the wrong, I have, like 20 tabs open, I'm in the wrong one, I'm sorry. I was trying to confuse everybody.
He just wanted to see
How
if
did I
everyone
do?
was paying attention.
All right, staying on 105 then, for the moment. Any questions or comments on 105?
I just want to point out that in the AR, if you look on what is stricken on the second page of the policy, where it talks about equal educational opportunities for all students, in the AR, it's going to read equitable opportunities for all students, because equal is not, equal and equitable are not the same things there. The other thing that will be in the AR, sometimes when we make some purchases, things cannot be easily adapted to students by the district. And so one of the things that we'll make a point in the AR of saying is when, if there's an instructional resource that cannot be easily adapted by the district, that we will give kids options to get that same exposure or practice in other ways. You know, there's a couple things, especially if you think of the stuff in Zern, the elementary math, if you look at even some of the ALEC stuff that's not easily adaptable, if we have kids that need those adaptations, we'll make sure that there are other resources available. And that's just good teaching and instructional practice.
Anything else on first reading of policy 105? Mark, I actually think you were in 705, but let's finish these first readings and then we can hop back to your comment. I got a note, we'll go back to you, all right? Okay. Okay, we'll move 105 forward for first reading. 105.1 is the curriculum review by parents, guardians, students, and community members. Dr. Yanni.
One of the things that I'll say as a preamble to this, this is a policy that we're also going to bring back each year for review as a way to bring light to it, because there are a number of times through a school year that we will receive requests for parents to review either assessments or different parts of the curriculum, and we want to make sure that we make that process easy for parents, guardians, families, community members to know about and easy to access. As I look at this, the language that is stricken is really administrative regulation language. So if you look at the second page of that policy, items 1 through 5 have been moved to the administrative regulation. I do want to have conversation about, under purpose, the word assessment techniques, or the phraseology there. Mrs. Sherpier had spoken with Mr. Wallach and then also spoke with me about this. We originally took that out, but taking that out means that what we don't mean here is for parents to be able to view the assessment, but rather for parents to get information about how we are assessing kids. So if it's okay with everyone, I'd like to leave that word technique in there. So it's stricken now, but we'll leave that word in there.
So that came out because I made a comment last month about techniques, because all of the other things that we're talking about here are things that can be reviewed. Assessment techniques are not things that can be reviewed in any meaningful way. Like, it's a question: how do you review verbal answer? It's not a piece of paper or a checklist or a.
You mean methods?
I don't think it's that word that matters.
I think we mean assessments, and so I understand the concern about actually seeing the assessments.
I think there's a difference between standardized assessments and the classroom-based assessment tools that are used on a daily basis. To me, this is meant to read, and maybe I'm misreading it, that parents want to see some of the standardized tools. Am I
Yes,
correct?
no, that's correct, and that's really the intent or the spirit of the policy. Sorry, the spirit or the intent. It's not to look at, say, the test that I create for my fourth graders,
Right.
my math test, but it would be to look at the PSSA or to look at the Keystone or to look at the PASA. So
So can we just put in standardized assessments instead? Would that cover us?
I think it does.
And would reduce the ambiguity there?
Yeah, that would be more comfortable for me.
I have a question about that. Would that include like the STAR?
You can't do it with STAR because it's computer adaptive.
So if a parent
And
wants
it's not
to-
standardized anyway, that's right. Good point.
But like if a parent wanted to see what STAR was about, is there something to show them or explain? Or
We can give them the information about the test. What they can't they can't see actual questions. Like we have a few questions, like a question bank that we can share, like the samples, but they can't, even I can't go into STAR and look and see what the questions are going to be because they're automatically generated.
And I was just bringing that up because if we said standardized,
Mm-hmm.
then that would eliminate STAR, which is one of the things we're using to evaluate the kids.
Yeah, we could say, I mean, I think you're getting at the lead. The vast
Sorry.
majority of people that are looking at this are really looking at it to evaluate whether their child's going to participate in PSSAs and Keystones. So I think unless we're getting massive requests to look at STAR, to me, and you said we're going to review every year, so let's see how it holds up for a year potentially.
Right, and I think, I'll say this, I think there wasn't a data culture, we now have a data culture. I think because there was no data culture, there was a little bit of over-reliance on STAR. Now that we have a data culture set up with other common assessments, I think we're going to see less of a focus on STAR and more on some more holistic type of assessments. Does that make sense? Okay.
Yes.
Do we, when we say standardized tests, do we need to define that more fully, state standardized tests, or?
I actually have a note here that says state standardized tests.
Yeah.
Excellent. Any other questions, comments, or discussion on 105.1?
I just want to make everyone aware, we used to get, when the PSSAs used to come to us, we would get them a week to 10 days before we actually had to administer them. Last year, schools received them, we received booklets at Jarretttown Elementary School the day before kids were scheduled to take the assessment. So I think there were some parents and guardians that were feeling like we were not being transparent. They wanted to look at the assessments and we said we don't have them. The Department of Education, we received communication last week. We will get them in a very short time frame before the assessments again for test security. So when we get those requests, we'll make sure that the responses back to parents, guardians, community members this year explain the fact that as soon as we get them, we'll let them be viewed, but there is a chance that they'll come very close to the actual administration.
Will the state make any accommodations then for if parents want to view them and could they view an old sample?
Is there a deadline for submitting the opt-out form? And is that
No.
deadline before
No,
the?
I'm just worried that,
No. I mean, the opt-out form, last year we had kids take the first day or two of the PSSA and then an opt-out form came for the rest of the sections. No, I think the concern last year was that was the first year that it came in such a tight time frame.
Right.
There was usually plenty of time. We were scrambling to get student labels on books to administer the
Right.
assessments. They came so late.
Anything else on 105.1? Hearing none, with those amendments, we will move that forward. 105.3 is curriculum renewal and review process. Dr. Yanni, any comments on that one?
So last year when we brought Mr. Hoffman on and we started to look at how we were going to move forward with our curriculum renewal cycle, for a couple years the district did curriculum summits where there was a little bit of curriculum work done in just about every area of the curriculum every single year. And we need to go back to a very coherent cycle so that we can devote the energy and the funds that are needed to do refresh. And so this policy actually articulates, and the AR will articulate our curriculum review cycle, making sure that everyone is aware that we're no longer going to try to quote unquote fix things or enhance every area of the curriculum every single year, but rather devote some intentional focus over a period of time to each area of the curriculum. So we actually moved the the cycle to the AR. And then we also struck the language about middle states accreditation. Middle states accreditation is no longer something that is required.
Questions or comments from the board? Hearing none, we'll move that one forward, and we'll move forward to policy 210.2, which is the student allergies policy. Dr. Yanni? So
not really any change in the policy. Like we did with medications in the AR, we expanded allergies. The previous AR focused almost solely on epinephrine and EpiPens. We want to make sure that we were making that broader than just looking at or focusing on EpiPens. And we worked with our school nurses on that.
I only have one question. The state requires some training around this. Is it worthwhile to say under one, provide for appropriate training of staff to comply with?
Sure. Why don't we say in accordance with applicable law?
Thank you.
And just so everyone is aware, at the beginning of the year, we do EpiPen training. And then if kids have very specific needs or specific allergies, anyone that would come in contact with them on a regular basis, our certified school nurses do training with those folks.
We can probably strike 7 then, conform to applicable. It just seems like it's hanging out there as like a dangling, because the remaining I don't think are covered by law per se. Right.
Also, we'll make sure that in the AR, it specifically talked about individualized health plans, IHPs and 504s. We're also going to include language about IEPs, because if students have an IEP for something else and they have allergies or whatnot, that medical information is included in the student's IEP.
Correct. Good catch.
I can't take credit for that. That was one of our board members.
Anything further on 210.2? Excellent, we'll move that along. And our last first reading for tonight is 361, which is a new policy entitled Politics. Dr. Yanni, you want to give an introduction to that one?
Sure. So the genesis of this politics policy is a vehicle or a means to make it overt of how we're committed to and required to remain nonpartisan, being the adults in the system, and also to provide some structure for dealing with situations where staff violates that, or they endorse a political figure, or they espouse political beliefs in a course or a classroom, and they don't give the opposing view. The whole goal of public education is to provide, I hate to use the phrase fair and balanced, but that's really what we're trying to do. And when it becomes too partisan, we really, while students are protected under the First Amendment to say much more than adults in the system can, we want to make sure that we're very overt with our staff about what they can and cannot talk about, say, and do.
And I'll just add, I think this policy is modeled after the religion policy that was passed not too long ago to, similar to not sponsoring one religion, here in this policy, not sponsoring any political partisanship. Any questions or comments from the board about this policy?
I actually really like it. I know at first I kind of blanched that the title was politics and not civics or something, but it's not about civics. And I like the fact that we're just saying directly this is the expectation that we have of the people in our buildings. And I don't think it's ambiguous, and I like that about a policy. So from my standpoint, it's a good start at least.
Mark?
I'll say we took a very circuitous route to get here.
Right.
But I do think this is an important policy to protect nonpartisanship within our buildings, and while that wasn't necessarily the explicit goal of all of the variations that led us here, I'm glad we got led here to arrive at this final, hopefully final version.
Yeah, agreed, and I'm very appreciative of the discourse that happened among the committee, the administration, and the community that has come out to feed us, back some information, so I like it.
Agreed. Any other questions or comments? Okay, we will move those forward for first reading at the legislative meeting. We also have under 5.04 our agenda, 3 policies for first reading repeal, P106, P107, and P108. And I believe that these are all being repealed because they are now covered in other policies, or they've just become outdated in the way that the policies have changed over the years. Dr. Yanni, do I have that correct?
Correct, yep, thank you.
So any questions or comments on the repeal of those 3 policies for first reading? Hearing none, we can move those forward. I do want to go back just because Mr. Sirota raised it to policy 705 that's up for second reading.
I apologize that I didn't
No
catch
worries.
that. I was looking in the wrong place when we talked about 705 before.
While we're here, let's get it.
So in 705, under delegation of responsibility, the first set of bullets, bullet B has new language while on district property. And I'm curious why we're narrowing that statement.
The concern that I had without some type of narrowing, and I hear what you're saying about field trips, is that technically an employee could be performing his or her duty at their house, grading a paper, preparing a lesson plan, and we don't have any safety obligation over that employee at that time. Now, maybe on district property is too narrow, but I think we need some qualifier there.
Yeah, that's a good catch.
I would not have thought of that.
Yeah. But I do think while on district property is too narrow. I think it's a good catch.
I think we can say while
Executing the school business during the regular workout? No, that won't either. Nope.
so I know Dr. Davis was a superintendent in her previous life, so maybe she'll correct me here if I'm wrong. Or maybe she'll just correct me privately after the meeting, so it's not to embarrass me. But I've always taken the stance that if you're on, a bus stop is still considered, in essence, district property because school rules apply there. Same thing on field trips, same things when we're off-site, it's technically considered school property.
I think this may be a good question for the solicitor.
Yeah.
To come up with some language that expresses,
I'll call Ed tomorrow.
yeah,
Maybe he thinks we're nuts.
he probably does, but that's okay.
That's fine.
That's
too.
what we pay him for, to think
Right.
we're nuts.
Well,
Blame
good,
it on me.
he won't even charge us the 15 minutes if he says we're not. So that may come back then for, sorry, is this a?
It's currently a second reading,
Reading,
we'll
but-
see how it comes
yeah,
back, yeah.
If it's substantive,
Yeah.
we'll bring it back as another reading next month.
Excellent. Okay, with that, I think we have covered all of our items in the policy report recommendation section, so it is time for community input. If any community members have any questions or comments, please come up, state your name and area of residence, and go for it.
Geneva Tell, I know you're going to talk to the lawyer tomorrow, but how about school-sponsored events or trips? Would it capture that to me? And not to bring back 707 and Section 10 yet again, but to me, we're all under community access, so I don't, right? So we don't even have to say persons using or leasing, because we're already saying in above that the usage or leasing, so we are already specific to community and specific to leasing and using. So, I don't know that you have to redo that. I think prohibition of political campaigning, right, altogether, because it's already implied that it's the community, and it's already implied that it's persons using or leasing, right? Because it's already stated.
All right, that's it. Thanks.
Tanya Cologne, Fort Washington. I just wanted to say thank you for having the policy meetings during the evening and following right after Ed Committee, so it's just that one night that you kind of have to commit. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I just want to say, Ms. Evans and I have been well, actually, I should say Ms. Evans has been updating it. I give her the credit of the policies that are left to work on. So we're coming to the end of, well, not to the end, but to the last batch of policies that we have to look at. Next month is a discussion item. I'm going to work on a cycle so that, you know, our policies became very old and a lot of work has been done over the last couple of years to update everything. And so I'm putting together a cycle document so that we never find ourselves in the position of policies that are 10 or more years old, and then we have to refresh the policy book all at the same time. So that'll be a discussion item at next month's meeting.
Excellent. Anything else from the committee or the board? Great. With that, we will announce the next policy committee meeting will be Wednesday, April 1st. As my predecessor in the last meeting said, no kidding, at 7:15, we're immediately following the Education Committee right here in the Cardinal Room. And with that, we are adjourned. Have a great evening, everyone. Thank you so much.